I'm Dave.
And I'm Rob.
We've got the same dad.
But we didn't meet until I was 16.
And I was a lot older. So this is the podcast where we make up for lost time.
By sharing an album that...
your...
brother...
should...
No!
Fantastic. What an intro. So, welcome everybody to episode 12 of Your Brother Should Know. And this month it's been threatened in various of the preceding podcasts, I am going to share, and have shared with Rob, Elton John, specifically Madman Across the Water. Before I go any further, Rob, when I said, and when I have said over the years that you've known me, I bloody love Elton John. What has that made you think? What's your preconceptions?
Well, we'll dive straight into the memory banks and our shared family history here, I guess, which is a novel approach. So 2 things, actually, Dave. I think maybe the second or third time I ever met you, you were performing a cover of Rocket Man. Which I thought was...
Forgot about that.
Which I thought was obviously a deeply uncool song. I was 17, 18 at this point, and yet, you know, you seemed pretty cool up on the stage, singing it with those perfect harmonies, and I was like, okay, this is, you know, changing my opinion a little bit. And the other thing is, yeah, just at home. I don't know whether it was our dad, but it sounds like it was more likely my mum, but there was definitely a big 2-CD Elton John best of compilation, which was very frequently in the 6-CD changer. So I feel like I'm been loosely kind of aware of him as like syrupy, parent-friendly background music for a very long time. Didn't really give him a second thought until, obviously, he's been given, a little bit of a flesh lick of paint thanks to the patronage of a certain Mr. Ed Sheeran, who's kind of been singing his praises a lot, and I think there's been a reassessment following the movie. So yeah, but I haven't subsequently gone away and spent any time listening to his music or reassessing his legacy in any way. So, in fact, I don't think I've ever really assessed his legacy in any serious way. So this has been quite an interesting exercise for me, one that hasn't been unrewarding, but perhaps hasn't been as rewarding as you were hoping it would be.
No, it's fine. I know the levels of obsession I have with a particular period of Elton John are probably unhealthy and probably fairly unique. So, like you, I first encountered Elton John through 2 LPs in our dad's, my mum's LP collection.
Well, there you go.
No idea. I know, no idea who's, but you know, the age difference is there because my Elton John in the collection was LPs and yours was CDs. But and the 2 LPs were Elton John, which was his second album, and Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, which was his kind of behemoth mid-70s double album. I put them on as a joke. I remember I had a record player in my room, and I remember going, I thought I was cool because I was into early U2, for goodness sake. And I put them on thinking, well, this is going to be rubbish. And from the first needle drop, I was absolutely hooked. And so I have to say, if anybody's on this podcast expecting a kind of root and branch, oh, this is Elton John, forget it. Because look, there's a whole, he's a massive global superstar. There's his whole Disney stuff. There's a film about him. There's books about him. The charity work, the Princess Di thing, the well-documented troubles with drugs, the AIDS awareness work, all of that. There's so many tentacles to his kind of global presence. And my focus with Elton John, because I kind of ignore all that, it's all just noise to me. The Elton John I have in my heart and soul are his 10 albums from 1970 to 1976. And I say 10, there were actually 12 because 2 of them are double albums. So just that in itself, 12 albums in 6 years. So 2 albums a year he was contracted to churn out during that period. And it's known as his classic period, I think rightly. But it's just amazing in the first place that he was able to tear out so many, him and Bernie Taupin were able to tear out so many albums in that time. Go, Rob.
And that's exactly why I want to ask, first of all, why you picked this one.
Yeah, really difficult. So, just for those that do know the classic period Elton John, so those 10 albums are Elton John, Tumbleweed Connection, Madman Across the Water, Honky Chateau, Don't Shoot Me, I'm Only the Piano Player, Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, Caribou, Captain Fantastic and the Dirt Brown Cowboy, Rock of the Westies and Blue Moves. 2 of those albums I think are crap. I have never been able to get on with Rock of the Westies and Caribou. Sorry for Elton John fans that have. The other 8 out of 10 are absolutely Desert Island, like top 30 albums. They're all in there. In particular, there's 5 of them, and I have gone round the houses knowing I was going to present to you, trying to kind of present an artist that's in those albums done such a variety of different types of work, went from mad pop to rock to this kind of more heavily orchestral, ballady, more intense singer-songwriter stuff. Really difficult. If someone was to say to you, look, give me the quintessential Neil Young album or the quintessential Frank Zappa album or the quintessential Bob Dylan album, I would really struggle to do that. And for me, Elton John is on that plateau.
Harvest, hot rats, and blood on the tracks.
Okay, well, I would disagree with you on all that. And for those albums,
I actually would. I'm being glib, and this is an aside. But literally this afternoon, a colleague asked me, I never really did Dylan. Where should I start? And instantly, I go blood on the track.
Yeah. The particular problem I have with Elton John is I think in those classic period albums, he did flit around stylistically quite a lot within the sort of confines of pop rock. So it's kind of difficult to say this is what he sounds like. Secondly, although my top 5 albums are Madman Across the Water, Honky Chateau, Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, Captain Fantastic, and Blue Moves, I think they are brilliant. I'm aware every single one of them has a flaw. This one has a massive flaw. There's one track I cannot get on with on this album.
Only one?
Come on to that. Only one. Thank you. And so that made it difficult as well. It's like, how do I convey? And the obvious choice would have been Blue Moves or Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, because they're double albums and they give you a far bigger scope of what he's capable of and the kind of range of styles he's capable of. But, it's a bit unfair to pitch you a double album, so I ruled those out. So that left me with Honky Chateau, Madman and Captain Fantastic, and I went round and round and round for months, actually, to think which one. In the end, I went for this one because it's before... He was big. He'd had hits. He'd had Your Song. It's his third album proper, because his first album, Empty Sky, didn't really do anything. But actually, at this point in time, it could have gone either way. This is pre-Rocket Man. This is pre-Goodbye Yellow Brick Road. The song at the end of this, which we'll come on to, Goodbye, sounds like a goodbye. It feels to me like, he'd got some popularity. He churned out a lot of live tours and these 3 albums. But this album, it was like a decline. So his first 2 albums charted. This one charted much less in the UK and a little bit less in the US. It kind of could have been all over with this. He wasn't the massive global superstar that he was about to become. I mean, after this album, he had 6 albums in a row that went to number 1 in the US. No one's ever done that. But this one really didn't chart as well. He hadn't had a hit since Your Song. He could have just been a kind of footnote to musical history. But so I think this album finds him probably at his most intense singer-songwriter. And we'll come on to that because, of course, Bernie Taupin does the lyrics. And what I've really always loved about this album is the soundscape. And I guess you either like that or not, but the interplay between his, I think, quite astonishing vocals, his piano style, and the orchestral arrangements, and a sort of slightly kind of driven, soul-y, almost, I mean, R&B, no, but kind of a quite a rhythmic thing going on as well. I just find constantly appealing. That in the end, I thought, and also balancing up there are flaws in the other albums. This is the one I went for to try and hook you in to the magical world that is Elton John in the early 70s. What did you think?
Well, from everything you're saying, it sounds a little bit like this was his born to run, his make or break, his big statement that ultimately catapulted onto something to greater fame. And like that record, it has a lot of highs, a lot of lows, and a lot of very overblown production. And you're right, I think that sonic syrup is kind of alluring, but also, pretty scattershot. It's very much a record of its time. It probably sounded fantastic in 1971. If you had like a nice high-end stereo system back then and you put this on, this would be driving the dynamic range. The sound stage would have been fantastic. And from the minute I put the record on, you can tell there's something, within 2 or 3 tracks, you can tell there's something special is happening. But I could tell it was a great album. The next question was, do I like it?
That's brilliant. I'm just going to come back on that. Then I'm going to ask you that question. I guess in many ways it isn't his Born to Run. Probably his Born to Run, oddly, is the next one, Honky Chateau, which has Rocket Man on it, where actually he went to that place where the Rolling Stones recorded Exile on Main Street.
You mean the Chateau? Yeah, Chateau, whatever.
And really stripped back with his band and did that band in a room thing and knocked out a great album of kind of Elton John rock and roll classic type stuff, and probably because of Rocket Man, that's what put him back on the map in a sort of Born to Run type way. This one, as I say, kind of just went chart wise, and didn't do that Born to Run stuff.
But it does hold what is one of his biggest and most enduring tracks, and we can't avoid talking about it. So this record, despite having heavy rotation of Elton John in my house growing up, as I say, the only song that I feel I knew was the opener, and obviously it's a song we all know. I'll be honest, it's a really fantastic song. It comes on and instantly evokes a mood, a vibe. It's one of those classics which somehow hasn't got old. Wonderful, wonderful opener. It's just such a big warm embrace. But I'll be honest, it did instantly remind me of two things.
Go on.
Neither of which will probably impress you. The first,
I don't know. I'm an Elton John fan, so
almost famous. Cameron Crowe's great love letter to 70s rock and being a young journalist on the road. Fantastic scene when they're riding the bus, and the sun is setting and he's with the band, and that this comes on, and it's just a beautiful, beautiful one of those montage moments. A really great. I mean, that movie's full of great soundtrack moments, right? And I think for me, the fact that someone like Cameron Crowe, who obviously has great rock credentials and has been on the road and interviewed Neil and Joni and Led Zeppelin and everyone,
sure,
slots Elton John into that world, into his soundtrack for that record, because it's also got like a really rare like acoustic version of Quarters of the Killer, which back in 1997 you wouldn't be able to hear. So I was just like, wow, this guy knows his stuff. So that's always been a big pro for me. The other thing is, of course, the Ed Sheeran song, doing
yes,
90 on the streets, on the back alleys of Suffolk or whatever, listening to Tiny Dancer. I think it was the first single off his second record, perhaps. Yeah. I can't extrapolate that memory because that song was omnipresent for a wee minute, and because I think he just played such a role in rehabilitating Elton John. So it's a great piece of music, but I couldn't really divorce my existing preconceptions from my enjoyment of it.
You see, I'm going to come back on that a couple of things. I think your view of how Ed Sheeran might have rehabilitated Elton John might be a bit overblown, because I think Elton John was doing quite all right before Ed Sheeran came along. He'd won Oscars for his Disney soundtrack. He may not be at that point, Well, let's nail that now. The thing about Elton John for me is that he goes in the holy five trinity of desert island artists. So for me, it's Neil, Torrey, Frank Zappa, Lou Reed, and Elton John. Those five. If I only had five artists to take to a desert island, they would be it. And I'm very, very, very aware that he is, although he is this global superstar that's hugely respected now, he doesn't get the same level of kind of rock and roll respect that like Springsteen or Dylan do in any way, shape, form. And yet I'd rather take Elton John albums to a desert island than either of those two.
And that's totally within your rights, but I think when you're talking about rock and roll props, we know there's a good reason for that. I knew you were going to bring this up, and yeah, it's quite self-evident. I mean, on the one hand, you don't help yourself dressing up as Donald Duck or whatever, all the ridiculous costumes, all the excess, all the, he was marketed very much as an entertainer, right? And there's no shame in that. And I no doubt he was one of the best in his day, and I'm sure he can still hold a tune today. But yeah, you don't go down as a legendary iconoclast doing that kind of, putting those kind of low-hanging fruit. And secondly, I mean, I do think, again, there's no shame in not writing your own lyrics, but we're in love with the tortured artist syndrome, right? I call it the the Van Gogh effect. As horrible as it is, we love the idea that someone cut his ear off for love or whatever. We want that person to really believe what they're producing, what they're singing, what they're throwing at us, and the idea that he's potentially just cynically taking words he's fed and planting pretty melodies around them. He's never going to be considered in the same league as you say, a Dylan or a Lou Reed or whatever, because whilst musically he may be far superior to them, we don't have this whole complete package, this idea of the auteur, the troubadour, whatever, this kind of romanticized view of art. And we all know that art isn't that simple. Very rarely is it one guy and a guitar that really, I mean, Nick Drake, Pink Moon might be the perfect, the closest we have to an example of like it being a pure artistic statement. Of course, there's going to be other collaborators and other factors that affect the creation. But in this case, because his legacy and so much of, the lyrics are very, very important to music, whether they're engaging or not. And the idea that he wasn't responsible for them, wasn't really crafting his message, and was also packaging it in such a silly image. I frankly think the fact that he is held in such renown today, goes a huge way to explaining how good his music actually was, that despite that, he's held pretty high up the ranks. He is a legend and regarded as so.
Yeah, no, and I totally get both of those bits of analysis. And on the Just on the kind of the Donald Duck, just desperate need to be liked by every stadium and every population. A lot of that's well documented in movies and books anyway about, the pressure he was under to deliver 2 albums a year, to do the constant touring schedule, his well documented, issues with drugs, therefore, and what that meant was you got this kind of weird pastiche of Elton John, singing your song. What a beautiful, intense, lovely piece of work in a Donald Duck costume to 80,000 people. It's just such a weird image. And I just have to go, do you know what, that was what he was doing as a reaction to becoming a global superstar, and that hits people in different ways, and that's how it hit him, and it took him, decades to get over.
And now that story's been told, we can kind of understand it a bit, because now we've humanised his struggle. But I think he hid behind the showbiz. He hid behind the showbiz mask and kept trying to keep the show running or whatever. And had he been a naked-hearted, had he had a blood on the tracks moment and been like, hey, I messed up, which is interesting because there's moments this record seems to hint at like a weakness and drugs and addiction, perhaps. But again, they're not his words, and it's kind of, to me, painting quite a glamorous idea of life on the road, and so maybe we should get into some of the music, because as I said,
so just to finish off on that, I don't know if it's true, but so again, what I've read and seen is like Rocket Man, and that's not on this album, but Rocket Man, Bernie Taupin wrote that about Elton John because it's about drugs, and Elton John sang that thinking it was about going to space. So exactly that, which brings us on to your second point about, I absolutely get that he doesn't, one of the reasons he doesn't get the same cachet is because he doesn't write the lyrics. And for me personally, he's in that top 5 of Holy Trinity top 5. That doesn't work. But
Holy Quinity,
but I'm aware of that. Holy Quinity, and it's exactly that. It's a testament to how powerful I find his music, and sometimes how powerful I find the interplay between the words and the music. But mostly, it's the music that gets me, that he's in there, and it is just it is always going to be a thing that he didn't write the lyrics, and so there you go. You're absolutely right. Let's get back to the songs. Tiny Dancer, do you know the thing about Tiny Dancer is I went through a stage when I listened to this album because it was so just there and out there and popular that I just sort of started track 2 because I thought I'd heard it enough. But actually,
I want to do that every time. But But weirdly,
actually,
I really enjoy it.
It's so. I know exactly. Yeah. It's so bloody good. It's so bloody good. You just go, no, I'm gonna go through it, and actually, it's a pleasure every time. The thing to say about it is, it wasn't a hit at the time. What a slow burner! It went in at number 41, was the highest it got in the US charts, and it wasn't even released in the UK because it was too long. So it's been a real slow burner through doing live shows and other people, and now there's 3 things I've picked up on, that's put it in popular culture. There's the Almost Famous thing, which you've talked about. Have you heard about the whole Friends thing, where Phoebe is convinced that the lyrics to it are "Hold me close, young Tony Danza." There's a whole thing. Tony Danza being an American actor who was in Taxi or something, and they do a whole riff around that. Apparently that's big. And then recently I discover, and I live in a bit of a bubble in terms of really modern music, but have you come across the duet he'd done with Britney Spears called "Hold Me Closer"? That pulls in bits of this chorus and a different verse. It's and it was her kind of comeback after 6 years and finally being free of her. The court case about getting her freedom back from her dad and that kind of thing. It was her first release after that. Was a collab with Elton John around this song. So it's now,
a collab.
A collab. See what I did there? So it's now like it's seeped into popular culture. But when it was released, like this album, it kind of went and it was banned. It wasn't helped. It was banned apparently from some US radio stations because of the line "Jesus Freaks" out in the street. That was enough to get it banned in those days, which is quite amazing as well, isn't it? Given what goes on in lyrics these days. But there you go.
Indeed, it is. So I feel like that song sets a really high bar, and
yes.
If there's any song that can almost follow up, I think Levon. How are we gonna say his name? I mean,
Levon.
He says Levon, but I always thought it was Levon. So Levon Helm, which it is or is not written about.
I mean,
that is another fantastic, wonderful song.
He shall be leave on, and he shall be a good man.
I think the way it rolls up and the pre-chorus especially, when it's born on Christmas Day, New York Times said God is dead. It's like, and then it just kind of climaxes and it's like,
today.
and it's
and he shall believe. Yeah.
And then obviously we go into Razorface, and it's like, okay, is this going to be like a
just to say, I'm going to cut your slightly. So Leave On and Tiny Dancer, he's just done his final tour. Those two songs are the two songs from this album that made it to the final tour. So if we were in a world of like, what's the best tracks on here, which we can, as far as Elton is concerned, those two.
Well, these are two of the three best tracks. These are two of the three best tracks on here. But let me
go on, Razorface.
So then we come on to Razorface. So at this point, it sounds like, are we introducing a cast of characters? It's like a concept album, like a look around the room and pick out the oddities and the singular individuals that make our world a beautiful, diverse place. Yeah, it's another epic chorus sing along. Really, really enjoy it. I find the outro a little bit, with the harp solo and the kind of Stonesy swaggering guitar, maybe trying a little bit too hard to make his own exile there already. But as a trio, it's building up and up and up and up. And then we reach what I
agree.
What is the best track on the album, right? The title track.
What a tune! What a tune!
Yeah, I mean, I don't know where to start with this. It's like that little repetitive riff, which isn't probably as good as it thinks it is. A number of times it's repeated, but kind of blurs into your head, that little minor key thing, and it sets up that dirgy, swampy thing that's quite, and it just builds and builds and builds. It again, a lot of this stuff. Maybe it's because I just haven't heard enough, early mid-70s classic rock, but a lot of it did remind me of Springsteen in the production, in that kind of clashing of elements. And this song especially feels a little bit like Lost in the Flood, the way it's got that kind of minor key lament, and it feels very it carries a lot of weight. I've got to say that, like the rest of the preceding four songs, there are moments where the production does get too much. I can see it's a product of its time, and I enjoy a lot of its indulgences. But there are moments where it can feel overpowering. I think it depends on the time and the place and probably the headphones you're using. But this is a song that I'd really love to hear him do solo on the piano. You know what I mean? I imagine it would be just as powerful.
Well, that is available to you on YouTube, because when this was released, there's a BBC sessions he did. Where he is doing it stripped down on a piano, maybe with guitar and drums bass as well. I'm not sure, but you can see it, and yeah, it does come across well. This song, just the rhythm of it, the flow of it, the lyrics, the kind of creeping, scary, kind of, am I mentally illness of it. Just does floor me every time. And that guitar, the first time I still remember the first time I heard that, and it sounds like someone's in the studio just slipped and turned it up like twice as loud as it should be. But it really works going through the whole thing. Yeah, it's just a. You can tell why they made it the title track. It's just a bona fide classic track, and I think probably one of the reasons I chose the album was like Madman Across the Water. If you think about Elton John in ridiculous glasses doing "Don't Go Breaking My Heart" with Kiki D and all of that, yes. Contrast that with something like Madman Across the Water. That's where that's where I do go. No. That's why I love him as an artist. This is an artist thing. This isn't a big pop star thing.
Yeah. In which case, I instantly want to know more about the song, because I believe you brought it up in our Supertramp episode. You're saying it's about mental illness. Can you tell me a little bit more? Yeah,
they're both quite heavy pieces of music as a first-person account of someone in, clearly in some kind of asylum or mental institution. The difference with the Supertramp one is that the guy's denying that he's, in an asylum. This one is very clear that he is, take my word, I'm a madman, don't you know? I love the lyric, is the nightmare black or are the windows painted? That kind of, how real is all of this? Yeah, it's just quite a powerful account of someone's difficult processing of their mental health status. I think because the music just takes you on a journey to drive more, I haven't sort of really analyse the lyrics much more than that. But it is odd to me that both this song and Supertramp's Asylum have pretty much the same kind of starting point of a narrative.
So moving on, Dave, often you come at me, the minute we sit down with an album I presented, you come up with a big theory. And I'm not a man for big theories, but I have a very basic, almost obtusely basic theory about this record, and it's so blindingly obvious
Right.
that I feel it can't be true. But every time I go down the track listing, it just feels this way to me. We've had a fantastic side A there. As I say, I'd say 3 legendary songs and 4 very, very, very strong songs. And for me, it just nosedives rapidly. I think everything on side B, this was a classic album waiting to happen, and then it just goes into like cowboy pastiche mode, like gospel, whatever. We talk about the production. I feel like the first side holds together because all the weird sonic elements are kind of serving the purpose and the songs are strong enough. It kind of goes into twee overdrive on the second half, and the songs aren't as strong either. I feel like we all know that the thing that Americans love most about Brits visiting and Brits performing is our accents, is our quirkiness, is our Britishness. And for whatever reason, he feels the need to kind of dial into some kind of like down south hillbilly shit, which leaves me really, really, really cold. And it's not really apparent in the first half, but pretty much every song in the second has this overtone. And yeah, so I feel like we've gone from an album I love to an album that I wouldn't buy in a bargain bin.
2 sides. Well, that's okay. Just on the American accent thing, I did see an interview with Elton John once where he was asked, "Well, why do you sing in an American accent?" And genuinely, Elton John went, "Do I?" That's like he hadn't realised he was doing it. He says, I don't agree with you at all. Other than, and I talked before about every one of these classic albums that I love has a flaw. I cannot get on with Indian Sunset, and yet when I was 14 or 15 when I first heard this album, it was my favourite song on the album. For whatever reason, I didn't notice its God. So again, we've said sixth form poetry, awful pastiche lines around Native
Geronimo's
Americans.
dead.
Yeah. The gentle cobweb hanging on a painted tip. I mean, like every single kind of Native American cliche you can throw in there in a really almost insulting way.
Got everything I need.
It's
My
just,
horse, my pipe,
I learned to hurl the tomahawk and ride a painted pony wild and run the gauntlet of a Sioux and make a chieftain's daughter mine. I really just, horrible. I can't get over that. I mean, there's some nice musical elements, but I can't. So I now, having gone from fast forwarding over Tiny Dancer and starting the album, to me now this album it's supposed to be 45 minutes long. To me it's only 38 minutes long because I just skip Indian Sunset every time. Can't get on with it. Can't get over those lyrics and the slightly over. I think everything you're saying, the overblown production, that with not enough song melody strength to support it. Absolutely, Indian Sunset has that in droves.
But
have you heard the interesting?
It is another epic to the same scale as Man Across the Water in the length and the ambition in the different sections and the dynamics and the throwing everything at the wall.
Sure.
And that storytelling element again, to me, it's very Springsteen-y. Actually, that kind of painting a character like it's ridiculously silly. But if you ever heard Outlaw Pete of Working on a Dream from like 21st century Springsteen, then it's not that silly. I mean, sillier songs have been written. But yeah, it's
right.
To me, this is probably the highest moment of a very weak side, and I can tell it's already ridiculous. But it just gets more ridiculous, right? I mean, then we're going to Holiday Inn, and this is not.
Love Holiday Inn.
This is not Chingy, is it? This is not one of the countless fun songs written about Holiday Inn. This is like an awful cowboy pastiche, like the way the mandolin, oh my god, it sounds like something cooked up for like a kids TV show maybe.
Wow. Well, there you go. Isn't that weird? Because I think without take Indian Sunset aside, I think then side 2 is just as strong as side 1. I love Holiday Inn, just a kind of depiction of being on tour and how miserable that is, and how you kind of think that's going to be great. That's what you all dream of, and actually you're just you're stuck in a Holiday Inn. I love the interplay between the mandolin and that piano break. That dang, 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 dang. Love all that. I fast forward over Indian Sunset and I'm back on the ride again. Rotten Peaches, you're going to say the same thing.
Rotten Peaches. I mean, I go to Peaches are a deep symbol of the American South. Got this really stodgy chorus. It's basically, to me, it's trying to do like the Stones' Sweet Virginia, that kind of down home vibe. But it's completely contrived. It feels like Hillbilly by Committee to me. I mean, it's like
I mean, it's probably not as strong as take Indian Sunset out. It's probably not as, it's probably I still love it. It's probably the weakest of the strong tracks, if you like, but I think it's saved. I always just makes me smile that the outro, the na 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 na, with everybody giving it large on that. I just think I tell you, the whole album for me, of course, growing up in, and because I heard this in a tiny room in Suffolk, it really does give you this kind of wide scope view of it just conjures up images of masses of long flat plains of American Southland, and Rotten Peaches is a big part of that. I think it just kind of continues to give you that image, and for me that was a kind of real sense of escape at the time.
And maybe if I'd encountered this music as a wanderlust driven 14-year-old who'd never left Suffolk, I might feel the same, but as a man in my 30s who's been to the American South and been all over the world, hearing some kind of pastiche by a British guy is really like almost offensive to me. So let's just recount this again. We've gone from like the Tale of Geronimo, this orphan kind of Native American parody, which is probably should be cancelled at this point, to this kind of like mandolin driven Holiday Inn, life on the road, again very very sudden. So this stodgy gospel hillbilly,
fantastic, uplifting, but strangely dark, Rotten Peaches.
And then we land at All the Nasties, which, I mean, what for a title
what
already.
A tune!
And when we get this kind of almost, this big church choir singing.
Oh, my soul.
So, singing the full-blooded city boy into a full-blooded city man. It's like, it's just so clunky.
So it's not clunky at all. It's overblown, but it's not clunky. Got to get on the roller coaster.
I do have a minor theory about why this half doesn't work and the other half does. Like we said, the production is over the top, but in the first half, the production seems to at least serve the song, or maybe the song is just strong enough to shine through, and there's no overt appropriation taking place. They're just really good songs about people, songs about a situation. Whereas these four, to me, all sound like he's trying to assume a style, an image, and it like I say, it's almost too simple for me the way that the record is cut in half. And I didn't want to be that guy that goes great side A, shit side B, but it's the only way I can carve it, honestly.
Fair enough. No, and I know some of the backstory was so Elton John came out in 1970. Tumbleweed Connection came out in October 1970. This came out in November 71. So, and there was a set that from some of the stuff I read that they were scrabbling around a bit for songs, because they, and were thinking of using some real past stuff, from there, because they used to be Tin Pan Alley songwriters. They wrote songs for other people in the late 60s, and they were scrabbling around for some of that stuff. But I don't know. I don't see the join now, or I never have, other than I say Indian Sunset. I just think I think the overblown production, they find the way of making it work, and particularly in All the Nasties, which I have seen stripped down with just a piano, and it's quite affecting. I love the whole gospel choir thing at the end, and I remember that again the first time I heard it, going, "Are you going to do anything else but Oh My Soul?" No, we're just doing that. And now, yesterday I was walking across London Bridge back from work, listening to that. Just totally, I was drumming along to it, walking across London Bridge, looking like a nutcase, for that 2 minutes of Oh My Soul, and the harmonies go up, and I get it. Hairs in the back of my neck stand up. It grabs me. If it doesn't grab you, I can see you're going to be a long way from enjoying it. But it really grabs me. So there you go.
All I will say is I've recently moved house, and I've already had one noise complaint. So having to subject them to this record 3 times at volume today. Let's see how that goes down.
Yes,
it's definitely a change from my normal rotation.
Last half of All the Nasties on repeat. Just Oh My Soul over and over again. See how long it is before you're thrown out of Hong Kong. Brilliant. And then you've had what I think are basically 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 bangers. And then you've got this just very, very dark goodbye, which does sound like it's Bernie and Elton going, "That's it, we've done our albums, we're out of here, we can't be bothered with this anymore." Yeah, it's just a very dark closer. I will write songs. They go, I will write songs for you, but it just feels like they're out there at that point. Yeah. But I don't know if there's you're so down on side 2. Did Goodbye rectify things for you in any way, shape, or form?
I thought it was obviously very, very poignant and affecting. I think it was a bit of a mood clash, as you say. It being less than 2 minutes long, I mean, it doesn't really register.
It's a coda.
It was a nice coda. I feel like it only really resonates knowing the backstory and the struggles that were apparent now. I did find it interesting to see that Alice in Chains' Jerry Cantrell covered it. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely hints at perhaps what could have been a deeper, darker, more credible, more rewarding direction that they as songwriters could have gone in, which might have led to a different, different image, but probably not sold as many records. and probably not
Sure.
been able to enjoy as many, things to pop his nose as and all the rest of it. So. And that's actually so. I mean, now we've talked about the record. I do want to ask you. Obviously, you're very much in love with this golden period of 10 records. I'm aware he had a bad 80s. Like everyone has a bad 80s doing disco, and it's conjured quite well. That's one of the few bits in the movie that's conjured quite well, I feel. Did he ever do a kind of stripped down Dark Night of the Soul, honest singer-songwriter records that could have acknowledge and dine out a little bit on that reputation once it's all public knowledge anyway, so to reclaim the narrative?
No, I mean, so the two things I would say, maybe three things I would say, is he did have a bad 80s. I mean, he came out and said, look, a lot of what I was doing in the late 70s and 80s was because I didn't have a moment sober in all of that time. Actually, if you're going to pick out one album from that period, and I haven't gone on to them all in detail, but there's an album called Too Low for Zero, which has I'm Still Standing on it, and but it's not what you're looking for. But I think it is an album of some pretty strong songs, where when I've dipped into that period on other albums, I've just gone, God, no, this isn't working. Later on, kind of like in the early 2000s, he did 2 or 3 albums, Songs from the West Coast, Peachtree Road, Captain the Kid, which are more stripped down, a bit more like Honky Chateau. But I think the thing is, I think the thing with Elton probably is I just don't think he has that dark soul. To like Neil Young just has this kind of fountain of kind of almost sorrow to draw on. I just think Elton just probably doesn't have that. And Bernie, he hints at it, and he hints at some of the struggles Elton's had, but it doesn't seem to be their kind of, like The Cure are just constantly talking about how depressed they are all the time, and that's a cliche, I know, and I love The Cure, but that's what they do. Actually, what they've done is make albums about some internal dynamic, but more kind of stuff out there, and classic love songs and that kind of stuff. They don't have that Dark Night of the Soul within them, which again for me is testament to they're still in my top 5 despite that. To be fair, neither does Frank Zappa. Frank Zappa doesn't sort of do a Long Night of the Soul, does he? He's just he's constantly about the keep trying and actively takes the piss out of that kind of almost teenage angst stuff in some of his albums. So no is the answer. The most raw, stripped down example of Elton John's talent, I think, is a live album. On top of all of these blooming studio albums, he did a live album that really launched him in America. Its title is The Date. It's called 17/11/70, so it was done on the 17th of November 1970, where it's just him, a bassist and a drummer. And it is incredible. I mean, he tears the stage a new one. It's not Dark Night of the Soul. It's rock and roll, just him and a piano. It shows you what an incredible, what a brilliant performer and pianist he really was, even with a tiny band. And really just grabs you for a long, long period of time with just those 3 instruments and his voice. And that's probably his most raw and stripped down moment. And it was a big launching pad for him into the States. But no, there is no Dark Night of the Soul with Elton.
I feel like I might have picked that live record up at a charity store once and probably never played it or given it scant.
Well, you should. So you said earlier, well, I think I know the answer to this. So you said you could see that it was a classic album that you could find lots to like about, but not that you could love, and I guess it's pretty obvious why.
Well, I said I could tell that it was a monumental big work, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to engage with it. I suppose one of the big things for me is that the best music often feels effortless. And there are moments where, despite the obvious meticulous sonic soundscape, the songwriting and the performance and the elements all gel together so well that, like Tiny Dancer is a great example, it does sound musically effortless, even though we can tell all the craft that went into it. Whereas the second half of the record feels very laboured. And I think that's, to me, perhaps the ultimate breaking point.
Now, that's fair enough. And therefore, if I was to recommend you further Elton listening, I probably would go Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, which is the obvious choice, but that is a double album that it's got Benny and the Jets and Candle in the Wind on it, but some really, really good kind of strong kind of pop rock and roll and some great ballads that just sound like, I mean, God, he just churned them out. Like it was, he literally got up in the morning and here's another massive monster song. That whole album I find brilliant, with the fatal flaw. And again, there is a fatal flaw. There's a song called Jamaica Jerk Off, which is a reggae pastiche from the early, from 1973. That's just as clumsy as everything we've said that the lyrics of Indian Sunset are about, and makes you feel it should be cancelled.
And it has a cover nearly as bad as this album, which is quite an achievement.
What's wrong with the cover?
I mean, this is a man not known for quality covers. I will say that.
No, that's fair enough. That's fair enough.
The ones that don't feature him generally look better than the ones that do, and this still looks bloody terrible. GCSE up class, maybe? I don't know.
So, and while I'm in the mood to recommend you, I don't know whether you will, but I don't know, maybe side one has given you enough that there's at least an artist there that you might want to explore. Blue Moves often gets a kicking critically. It's his last big double album and last of the classic period. I actually think it's amongst his finest work. There's some really good kind of soul and and that whole Philly soul thing going on there. I think that's a great album.
So more
and if you want something
American appropriation. Great.
Definitely some of that. At the very least, try Honky Chateau. You might like that. So, Rob, I'm aware that obviously, like the rest of the world, you consume music through Spotify because you can get everywhere, but you also have a vast and ever-growing LP collection of, I guess, special musical treasures. If this came up for a reasonable price on LP, is it something you would consider shelling out your hard-earned for?
I think on the strength of side A, if the rest of the record was this strong, I'd be digging deep for a vintage OG. But right now, at any price, I'm not sure I could afford the shelf space of side B.
Oh no! What you need is some kind of faulty pressing that only press side one, and that would work for you.
So, dear listeners, that officially wraps up season 1 of Your Brother Should Know. We've had a great 12-episode run. Now we're going to be taking a month or two off for summer. But first, we'll be touching base to see how these 12 musical treasures that we've shared with one another stack up, and if any of them, make the others Desert Island list today. So stay tuned for that.
Looking forward to that immensely. I think you've done well there, Rob. I think there's 2 or 3 that I am, and I don't think I've really landed one with you, but never mind. Tune in next time to find out. In the meantime, if you have been, thank you very much. Bye!